Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Hunter Ohanian. I'm the director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and we're very happy to have you here. And tonight, our guest is Steve Locke. Steve, say hello to everybody here.
Hello, everybody. It's nice
How
to
are
see
you?
you. I can't really see you all, but it's nice to see you all.
Where are we finding you this evening?
I am in my beautiful apartment in Stuyvesant Heights in Brooklyn.
Yeah. And so how's New York treating you these days?
You know, it's funny. I had never had any desire to live in New York, but I really, really love it. I mean, I'm probably the first person you ever met who moved to New York to relax. Like, I feel very calm. It's wonderful, you know. The only bad thing is the chowder. The chowder is terrible.
Well, you have been in New England, even though you're from Detroit, you've been a New Englander for a long time. And so
a long time. I can't take the red sauce with the chowder. I can't do it. It's awful. It's an abomination, actually.
It is an abomination. I had kind of a similar experience when I was in my 50s. I moved to New York and I lived there for 10 years. And it was only because I had an opportunity to be there. I didn't aspire to be there at any other time. And actually, to be there at a particular point in your career when you're not trying to prove anything is really sort of a nice way to relate or to be in New York.
Right. I don't have that sort of that sense of desperation that I had when I was younger.
Yeah.
And you know, so much of trying to build a career is the hustle, like constantly like working and trying to get this and trying to get that and trying to get this and trying to get that. And I don't feel like I have to do that now. I mean, I don't have to do that now because I've been very, very fortunate. But it also makes New York like like you, I never had any desire to live here, never. But now that I'm here, I can't imagine being anywhere else. It's great.
I know, I enjoyed it too. So for those of you just joining us, welcome. We had started this series probably in the beginning of COVID-19. I think it's been going on for 4 months now. We've had great people here, artists, writers, thinkers, organizers about a variety of gay topics. And we really did start this because of COVID-19, and we wanted to be able to bring people together and continue to do programming. And some of these shows, there have been hundreds of people who've joined us. And so if you were one of those people, we want to say thank you for being here. I also understand this is being simulcast on Facebook. And so for all of you on Facebook, hello.
Hi, Facebook. Wear a mask. Wear a mask.
We're both good Facebook friends, and so friend us on Facebook, and we'll be happy to chat with you there as well. Just a little bit about Stonewall. We are 47 years old. We are here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. We have the largest LGBTQ library in the United States. Over 28,000 volumes are in our library. And in our archive, we have 2,700 linear feet of books, records, and papers, mostly from the last quarter of the 20th century to the present day. That 2,700 linear feet meant nothing to me when I heard it, but when they told me it totals over 6 million pages of material, it actually kind of sunk in as to what we actually have there. And so visit us at stonewall-museum.org, sign up for our newsletters. This event will be recorded and will be posted on our website as well. So if you have friends who can't see it, who want to see Steve and listen to him, they can do that. You can also sign up for our newsletters. If you have any old gay shit at home, send it to us because we love all that stuff, and it's very important. It's important for us to get those things. Don't throw it away. Let us throw it away. Just send us stuff because that's how archives are actually built.
Sure.
So that's very, very important. So, and also just a bit about tonight. It's we started here at 6:30. We will go right till 7:30. Steve and I will be chatting. If you have questions, throw them into the chat or the Q&A box. And the last 15 minutes, we'll try to focus on questions. So be sure to just throw those out there. I might interrupt a little bit to bring some of those out to people. But Steve and I actually have kind of a big agenda. There are a lot of things that we have to talk about tonight. And for us, it's a little bit apart from what we've done in the past, because in the past, we have talked in this series about things that have been uniquely gay or uniquely queer. And we're going to be talking about some of those things tonight. But because there's also been a lot of controversy recently about public monuments and public art, and Steve has been so involved in these issues, both in the classroom and personally as an artist, I thought it was really important for us to have a bigger conversation about some of these issues. So before we get started, let me just be sure that we're all on the same page and everybody knows about Steve's background. Steve is now a New York-based artist. He was raised in Detroit, and he lived for many years in Boston. He received his M.F.A. in 2001 from Mass College of Art and Design, and he holds his bachelor's degree, but both of them from BU and MassArt. He attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. He's been very involved in that organization. And he has won a number of very prestigious awards, including a Pollock-Krasner, a Tiffany, and an Art Matters Foundation. His work has been exhibited widely, including the ICA in Boston, which is just amazing, Steve. I'm so happy that you had that show. It was a beautiful show there, as well as many other locations. And he's now teaching painting, drawing, and critical theory at Pratt Institute in New York. So Steve is actually, just for full disclosure, Steve and I have known each other for probably 30 years. We used to be across the street neighbors on Dwight Street in the South End. So it's nice to reconnect, even though we do see each other about once a year, it seems, but it's nice to connect this way.
And it seems that every sort of major organization that has supported gay and lesbian artists, Hunter has been a part of. So it's been a sort of, it's been a joy to see all the different places that you have sort of helped sustain themselves. You know, the impact on queer culture, when that book is written, you will figure prominently in it.
Well, that's very sweet.
It's just a fact. It's just a fact. You know, you think about Leslie Lohman, you think about Provincetown with its history of queer artists. You think about Massachusetts College of Art and Design with its legacy of queer artists, you know, like Luther Price, who we just lost recently. So like a lot of those careers, my own included, have been shaped by your work, either directly or tangentially. So I'm very lucky to have you.
Thank you. It's really sweet. It's sweet to hear it. And also, I just want to say one thing, that, you know, Steve and I are now not kids anymore. We have developed professional careers at this point. Yeah. But what's really nice, the reason why I just wanted to mention about the fact that we used to be across the street neighbors, is that you can maintain relationships and friendships through your professional life and your adult life, that you just don't know how these are going to turn out. And right. You don't know who can be helpful and what. And so we all strive to create networks in our little bubbles. And so it's just wonderful to be able to do that. And so just, you know, just keep your minds open to it, because you don't know where it's going to lead years later.
Yeah, it's true.
So Steve, let's start with the first quick question. So the first thing I want to talk about, we've all seen so much going on in the world, and particularly obviously here in the United States, with public monuments, them being torn down. I will say that for me, the most striking picture of a public monument torn down was when this country overturned Saddam Hussein, and seeing those amazing statues just with cranes coming on them and just taking them down. And certainly we saw some of that stuff go on in the Soviet Union and at the end of that time. But kind of base us, at least from an American standpoint, in the difference between public monuments and public art. Because I think in some cases, those two lines get blurred. And I think it's important for us to realize the difference about them.
They really do get conflated, especially right now, because it seems like there's an idea about art that it's good for kiddies, that everybody likes art, and it's sort of denuded of its power in some ways. And so public art starts to take on a sort of carnival feeling, sort of like, oh, let's go see this thing. It's going to be up temporarily. It'll be fun. It'll be engaging. It might be participatory, but that is different than the act of memorialization. And usually objects in the public sphere that are made to remember something usually come into being when the consciousness of some act is starting to fade, right? The German word for monument is Denkmal, which means thought object, right? And so we don't look to public memorials primarily for their aesthetic concerns, right? We look to them as markers to say, like, this happened here, and here you will remember.
But let me interrupt for a second, though. But certainly some public monuments do have aesthetic value.
I think that when you think about the aesthetic value of contemporary public monuments, a lot of them are terrible. No, really, they just are. They fail as art. They succeed as monuments because the tragedy is larger than the object, right? And this sort of started when people were building monuments when the tragedies were fresh in people's minds. That's when the sort of slip towards a kind of kitsch or a kind of sort of telegenic idea of memorialization sort of happened, a sort of a way to comfort people instead of trying to remind people. I think about the time between the Oklahoma City bombing and the building of that monument was very, very fast. And we don't hear very much about that monument anymore. It's one of the first monuments built in this country to memorialize people who had been murdered in an act of terror, right? We don't hear very much about that anymore as an artwork, right? People still talk about the Vietnam Veterans Memorial as an artwork. People still talk about the George Segal Stonewall Memorial as an artwork, not just as a marker of time and place, but as the aesthetics of an artwork. So sometimes they are linked. If you have a really good artist like Maya Lin, who's freaking 19 years old and coming up with that, or George Segal, who could talk about, whose whole practice was talking about the everyday presence of people, right? To turn those people at Stonewall into everyday people. Instead of making them some sort of outsized hero, they were everyday people who fought back against the police, right? That's where you have this sort of intersection between a public memorial consciousness and an artistic consciousness. But a lot of memorials now are dictated by committee, they're dictated by groups, and so it becomes very difficult for a clear vision to be articulated that's not influenced by all these other voices.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And of course, Maya Lin and George Segal were some of the ones that are public monuments that I was also thinking about are actually interesting works of art as well, too. And they certainly go down that path.
Actually, you know, at Logan Airport in Boston, the 9/11 Memorial at Logan Airport is one of the most beautiful pieces of public art, of memorial art I've ever seen. If you've never seen it, it's outside Terminal A. It's one of the most beautiful, incredible, transformative pieces of art in the city of Boston, and it's one of the least known.
Which is amazing. Yeah, I'll be honest. I certainly know Terminal A at the airport, but it's a monument that once we get done, I'll have to look up. So let's talk a little bit about what's been going on in the United States with regard to removing public monuments, and let's try to give people a little bit of background about the body of monuments that are being taken out, how they ended up there, why they're there, and what the response has been to them. And then ultimately, sort of the last question I want to talk about with that is what should happen to these objects at the end. But let's sort of bring us back to what's been going on with public monuments in the US and the removal of them.
Well, there's a moment in this country, a moment of sort of reckoning around race that, a moment of reckoning for white people, let me just say, around race that has started to address the way that people image themselves in public. Let's put it that way, right? And so you have all these statues in public of quote unquote great men, you know, and we can tease out what great men are later on in the conversation. But you take the memorial of someone like Andrew Jackson, right? Now, there's a monument to Andrew Jackson because he saved the United States from the British in the War of 1812, right? That's why we honor Andrew Jackson. We also know that Andrew Jackson was responsible for the Trail of Tears and the murder of countless people, right? So to hold both of those things in conversation at the same time, right, is the challenge of being American, right? That Andrew Jackson saved the Union, Andrew Jackson murdered indigenous people. We have to hold both of those things in consciousness at the same time. But because the second part of it has been denied to consciousness for so long, everyone has ignored it for so long, that now there's this huge groundswell to remove those kinds of images of slavers, of people who murdered Native Americans, or Dr. Marion Sims, who experimented on enslaved Black women, father of modern gynecology, right? Experimented without anesthetic on enslaved Black women, some of whom needed surgery, right? But some of whom were just sort of guinea pigs, right? So how do we hold both of those things in our consciousness at the same time? And Americans have never been very good at holding two things in their consciousness at the same time. It's not part of our national character. We're a very Manichaean people. It's either all good or all bad. So now that things are all bad, people have gotten into this place where those objects have to be removed because they are ascribing the evil to the object instead of ascribing the evil to racism or ascribing the evil to misogyny, right? So the objects no longer become symbols of honoring these quote unquote great men. They become this repository for our contempt for what they've done. Then there's another set of memorials that had nothing to do with honoring anybody. And I'm thinking about those Confederate memorials that were put up after, in order to reinforce Jim Crow at the end of Reconstruction. There's a statue of Robert E. Lee in cities he never visited. So why is that statue there? It's there as a monument to white supremacy, right? And those things are shrouded in the idea of history or the idea of some sort of historical narrative. I said hysterical narrative, like that was a Freudian moment right there. So sort of historical narrative, and it's not true. And so they aren't there to honor the glory of the South. They're there to tell Black people, nigga, know your place. That's the whole point of them, right? And so people are demanding that those come down because the intentionality behind them was white supremacy.
So let me stop you there and make sure that we have the timeline right here, or make sure I have the timeline right here. In the mid-19th century, we had the Civil War, which was to some degree about slavery. There were other issues, but slavery and white supremacy and racism were definitely a major part of what that dispute was about. Mm-hmm. Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation, and then supposedly all Blacks are freed in the country.
Right.
And then we start going down this path. We know change in government happens slowly, but we start going down this path in which during that period, more rights were given to Black Americans who had not previously had those rights.
Right, Black people started to vote. Black people started to sit in the House of Representatives. Black people started to have government power, right?
So that goes into the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and progress happens 30, 40 years. And then the losers, as it were, in the Civil War, who still believed in white supremacy, decided that they weren't happy with the effect of what had happened 30 years or 40 years earlier. And they decided to more subtly exert their power by putting up monuments to who they believed the true victors were in that war.
Right, they changed the narrative. right? And then so you start to have this sort of noble cause myth of the American South, that those statues put up during the end of radical Reconstruction and beyond, up until Brown versus Board of Education, they were putting those kitsch statues up. And they're terrible statues. It's not like they're great works of art. They're just these kitsch representations of people, right? But they became like mustering points for white supremacy. Like Stone Mountain in Georgia is a mustering point for the Klan. Like that's why it exists, right? And so people in this moment, which is so fraught, people are starting to say like that image, that object, its purpose is sinister. Yeah. Its purpose has always been sinister. It's not about memorializing, it's about terrorism. It's about scaring people, right? It would be like, you know, having a, you know, going to the Stonewall Inn, right? And putting up a monument to police officers, right? Like that's not, like we know that, you know, we know that there are police officers and we like them and some of them are good and some of them are gay and that's great. But when you think about what the police did at this moment, in this place, at this time, you're trying to intimidate me by putting that object here, right? And so that's the goal of those objects. And that's why people are demanding that they come down. They have nothing to do with history. They have everything to do with white supremacy.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And you say that that period really went from the 1920s up to Brown versus the Board of Education.
Right.
And Brown versus Board of Education, of course, was a decision by the US Supreme Court, what, 1960, 1950 in there somewhere?
1950s, yeah.
1950s. And it had to do with the segregation of schools. And so it was really a very formative part of the 20th century that people were able to put those monuments up, to be able to forward that terrorism.
Right. Imagine how crazy it would be to put up a sculpture of Osama bin Laden in New York. Imagine how crazy that would be.
Right.
You know, and that's how crazy it is to put up a statue of Robert E. Lee. It's like he was a traitor to the Union. He lost the war. They lost the war.
Yeah.
They tried to divide the country. They're traitors. So why are we putting up statues to them?
Yeah.
And Black people are asking this question. They've been asking this question ever since they had to look at Robert E. Lee's ugly face every time they walked down the street in Georgia, right? And so like that idea that you're gonna honor, like why are we honoring this person? Oh, we're honoring them to show Black people that this is not their place. That's the only reason you honor Robert E. Lee. Not because he was a great general. He wasn't that great a general. Yeah.
So you grew up in Detroit. Do you have a memory of having a question about, as a child, about why these figures were placed out there? Did you see much of that as a kid? Were you influenced by it?
There's tons of art in Detroit. There's tons of it. And so like I spent my formative years in the Detroit Institute of the Arts, and you know, the jewel of that collection is the Diego Rivera mural cycle.
Right.
So I didn't have any real problem with, like a lot of people, in my experience in Boston, there's a lot of people who feel pretty bad about being Black. Like I never felt bad about being Black because I grew up in Detroit, right? And so we saw, it's a Black city, and like the whole notion of being an American, like we didn't feel any different than any other Americans. Like that's the weird thing that I experience now, is when people treat me like I'm not an American, I'm just like, wait a minute, my family's been in this country for like 400 years. Like I'm just as American as you are. Like I like apple pie, I enjoy a baseball game, I like all that shit. I'm just like, I'm the all-American boy for the most part, right? But the difference is when I left Detroit, there were people who had this really sort of toxic idea about Blackness that I thought was completely crazy. Like Hunter, I never thought like any like white person calling me a name, I never thought that had anything to do with me.
Oh, interesting.
No, I was never like, I remember when I was at MassArt, this Black student was crying because someone had called her nigger. And I said, honey, you're gonna let some trash person calling you a name like distract you from the work you have to do? Oh, honey, no. That
Yeah.
person's garbage. That's about them. That's not about you. And so I never had that. I got called that all the time in Massachusetts. You know, the only place I was never called nigger in New England was Maine. It was the only place, you know. So let's hear it for Maine. But so that like, but Hunter, that stuff that never. I just thought that those people were garbage.
Yeah.
I never thought that had anything to do with me. But
Yeah.
now people are somehow wounded by that, and I think, wow, that's pretty incredible. Yeah.
Well, obviously, I mean, all of the situations that we grew up in, it affects all of us differently, and we have those different things that we take with it. And I certainly take your point with regard to this. One other thing that, in speaking about the monuments and what happened in the 20th century with regard to those and with white supremacy, that's also seems important to me, is about the distribution of power, and particularly about the distribution of civic, particularly local civic power. If you think about many of these communities, the decision to put that statue up in a town square had to be approved by the elected officials in that town. So somebody who had control had to do two things, usually. Definitely they had to say it was okay. They had to give permission. And number two, they also probably provided the funding.
Yep.
So they gave the resources and they said it was okay. And so for me, there's a political lesson that we have to think about today with regard to, it's not really that different today as to who's in charge of the local city council, who gets to be able to expend funds and to say it's okay to put a statue up. Any different than it was.
Who gets to pick the name of the public school?
That's right.
Yeah, it's very simple. Who gets to pick the name of the public school? And you see Muriel Bowers in DC just changed the name of the street to Black Lives Matter Plaza. She just changed the name of the street.
To me, that was one of the most wonderful, regardless of how you feel, and I think we both know how we feel about the act itself, but to me, it was a wonderful way of actually using civic power.
Exactly.
To be able to say, I'm going to do what I believe is right and what I believe my constituency think is right.
Right. And even if, you know, today nothing anyone ever does is ever good enough, you know, but you know, even that sort of gesture to do that, that is encouragement. It may not be like a concrete policy. It may not be reform in policing. It may not be all those other things, but let's just talk about what it is. The White House of the United States is now at 1600 Black Lives Matter Plaza. That's the address of the White House, right?
But how brilliant is that? It's so incredible. It's so wonderful.
I suggest that everybody write a letter to Donald Trump at 1600 Black Lives Matter Plaza, Washington, D.C., right?
And that's why the gesture, I mean, it's so much more than just a gesture, because that actually somehow feels like I'm diminishing it. It's a huge act to be able to do something like this.
You know, Hunter, a gesture is incredibly powerful. Like, I don't want to, from Martha Graham making a gesture on the stage to like the gesture of a drag queen, like throwing a boa, like those two movements are very close to throwing a brick at a police car.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no difference. Yeah.
Very well said. Well, just want to break in here. Just a reminder, everybody, that I'm Hunter Ohanian from the Stonewall National Museum and Archives. And I'm here with Steve Locke, and we're talking about public monuments and everything else. This is being recorded. So you can tell your friends to watch it. Hello to all of our friends out there on Facebook. Happy to have you all here. We're going to save the last 15 minutes for questions. So throw them into either the chat or the Q&A. I see that people are throwing stuff up there now, so that's great. We have a lot more stuff to cover in the next 15 minutes. I know Steve has got some slides he wants to show. And we've got some other things to talk about. So let's get back to it. So just to finish the story about the monuments, so we're now at this point.
Yeah.
We're at this point in which certainly since it seems like the spring of 2020, there was a moment of reckoning, as you say, mostly for Black people. I'm sorry, mostly for white people. There was a major moment of reckoning. And I think things are beginning to change in a lot of ways. But we've certainly seen a lot of people having a different feeling toward public monuments, and they're being taken down, and people are petitioning their cities, and cities are trying to do a better thing. I don't know, I mean, I don't want to say what's right or wrong, but they're trying to do something correct here. So what do you think should happen to these objects? We've read a million different stories. They should all be put in a museum somewhere. They should be smashed. What should happen to these things?
You know, Hunter, if we actually had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in this country, we could figure that out. I think that you know, you make a museum talking about the attempted genocide of Native American people. You make a museum telling that story, just telling that whole story. Just like, you know, in Germany or in Poland, there are museums that tell that story where people tried, this is what happened. We tried to kill all these people. And here's the pamphlets we printed. Here's the uniforms we made people wear. Here's like, let's lay it all out, like lay all of it out, right? You know, and that's what I think needs to happen here. And you know, Brian Stevenson at the Equal Justice Initiative, he says, you know, we do a lot of celebrating in this country. We celebrate all these different things. We celebrate, like, you know, the Voting Rights Act being signed, or we celebrate Juneteenth, or we celebrate all these different things. It's like, can we just take a minute and as a nation, dig up all the bodies? Let's find where all the bodies are buried, right? And let's, you know, pour out libation and say a proper prayer, and remember that this whole nation was built on all these people. We've never had that conversation as a nation. And if we have that conversation, we can start to talk about, like, our, you know, our attempted genocides within our own country against our own people. Until we have that conversation, there's no point. But yeah, I tear down the statues. I don't care about statues. I care about people. I think that when they come down, they need to be put into their proper context. Like, why can't we just say, like, you know what? You see this statue, little girl? White people put the statue up here because they thought that they were better than Black people. And they put it up so they would scare all the Black people. That's why this statue is here. Like, why can't we have that conversation with children? Like, why can't we use them as teaching objects? They're dunk models, they're thought objects. Let's have that conversation about them. Instead of saying, like, oh my God, this offends me, it must be torn down. Yeah.
It must be, as some say, it must be torn down or destroyed. And I think the best analogy for what you're saying, of course, is we can look at a Holocaust museum, and we can look at those kind of things to say, this was a terrible time in human history. And so we've used these artifacts to be able to show that story. So imagine if these artifacts were saved to be able to tell the story that you and I are talking about right now. And that we can actually teach future generations about what actually happened and is still happening in many ways. What is happening in this country? Right.
It's no different than, it's the same kind of archival project that you've spent your whole life doing for queer people. You know, Black people have all sorts of memories. Like that horrible movie Green Book.
Oh yes.
You know,
sure. Yep.
Like, that's an actual object. The Green Book is an actual object. So, like, let's talk about a society where the Green Book needed to be, where you needed that. Right. Like let's have that conversation. Let's talk about that, and let's get that all out in the open, right? Because once we do, it's like James Baldwin said: if white people knew their own history, they would be in tears. They would just be in tears all the time.
Yeah,
you know?
It's true. So let's switch gears a little bit, and one of the things that, let's talk a little bit about gay memorials. And Emery, I don't know if I'm doing this right. By the way, everybody, Emery Grant is here, who is
Yay, Emery!
our deputy director, and he's the one who makes all this possible. But Emery, where do I need to go to that green button that says screen share?
You're doing great, honey. You're doing
Thank
great.
you. But you guys don't see my my PowerPoint, do you?
You have to share screen and then click on the PowerPoint.
Open the program in the background.
Yeah, it's done.
Then hit share
There.
screen.
Open system. Oh, you see that?
No.
Nope.
Open
All
the
right.
program in the background, hit share screen, and then it's going to offer you what's on your desktop. Then click on the PowerPoint.
One moment, please. You should all talk amongst yourselves. Okay, so share screen. So do I want desktop?
It's going to
yeah.
Yes. You're going to
Share.
see everything that's on top of your desktop. Through
That's-
Zoom, you're going to want to click that.
It's asking me to open system preferences. All right, I'm going to pass because you know what, Emery, I'm going to send this to you.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask you to do it. I'm going to text it with you. But Steve, let's just to keep it going, and we'll get Emery queued up to do this.
If you send it, email it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm probably just going to text it to you. But let's talk a little bit. Before you left Boston, you were involved in a public monument there.
Yeah.
I think very near and dear to your heart. Very near and dear to you as an artist, very near and dear to you in the city that you loved and still love. Let's talk about that.
You know, it's a weird thing, Hunter, because I don't like to, I mean, I love you. And so the only reason I will talk about this is because it's you.
Thank you.
But I don't like very much talking about this, and I'm going to share my screen with you.
Thank you.
And talk, where is it? Here, okay. So in Boston, there's a lot of these kinds of, you know, little memorial plates in the landscape. You know, it's how we, you pay a certain amount of money and you can have a bronze plate dedicated to your loved one, right? And Faneuil Hall is like a big tourist attraction. It's called the Cradle of Liberty. It was built by Peter Faneuil, who was a trader, and among other things, he traded human beings, right? Now, there's no sort of marker at Faneuil Hall that talks about this. So there's jugglers, there's street musicians, there's fried dough, there's all sorts of stuff going on at Faneuil Hall. And none of the history of what happened there or how all the wealth that was created to make the modern Faneuil Hall marketplace, there's no discussion of that, you know? And so I was an artist in residence for the city at the time, and this part is crucial because the city has this wonderful artist in residence program where they ask artists to engage with the city, right? And so I love Boston. You know, I was engaged with the city that I had lived in. I'd made my home for 30 years, built my whole career there, right? And so I'm walking around and I get to Faneuil Hall and I start to do some research. I read Wendy Warren's amazing book called New England Bound, which talks about slavery in the colonies. And I realized that, you know, that this place was ripe for an intervention to talk about its history, right? So I proposed to put this map, sort of a updated version of this map of the transatlantic trade in front of Faneuil Hall as a marker, a very simple marker at grade, not above ground, in the shape, in the footprint of an auction block, right? To sort of metaphorically link that site to the sale of Black people, enslaved Africans and African Americans that took place metaphorically at that site, right? And thinking about it in terms of the relationship between the seller and the sold. And I was going to heat it to the temperature of a human body. Boston gets pretty cold in the winter. So it would be this about 14 by 16, no, 12 by 16 foot bronze plate in the ground that would be heated to the temperature of a human body, so the snow would melt, and it would be warm to the touch. And so it would be like touching someone's body there laid on the ground. And because it would be a grade, people could walk over it, people could ignore it, people could, you know, do whatever, you know, and it would still be extant, you know, you could walk right over it and not know it. And it would be on the Freedom Trail. So it would be part of the sort of narrative of American history, that you would walk along and you get to Faneuil Hall and you'd step onto this object, right? For reasons that are really ridiculous and painful, my work got caught up in this idiotic discussion about wanting to change the name of Faneuil Hall, right? And a couple of major organizations publicly said that they would oppose the project before it even came up for a public hearing, right? And they accused me of in the way of giving cover to the mayor to prevent a real conversation about race. That's what I was accused of. So I said, well, let me get out of the way so you all can have your conversation about race. If you're saying I'm in the way of that conversation, let me get out of the way so you can have the conversation. And when you're ready, I'm here, but let me just get out of the way. They ain't had no conversation, right? There's no conversation. So, and you know, I, as part of this artist in residence program, got the entire apparatus of the city of Boston, the entire government, the Parks Department, the Landmarks Commission, the sewer and the sewer people, the owners of Faneuil Hall, the Freedom Trail Foundation. I got all those people to agree that this was a good idea to honor the enslaved at that site, right? So when we talk about building a memorial, right? Hunter, there's a lot of shit people don't want to remember, right? A lot of people don't want to talk about slavery. A lot of Black people don't want to talk about it, right? So it's my job, it's not my job to entertain people. I don't do requests, you know? It's my job to tell the truth in public, right? And so I proposed an object that told the truth in public, and that like I said, nothing anyone ever does is good enough. Right. So, and other monuments will get built, other things will get built because they make people feel a certain way about things. They make people feel good about things. I'm not particularly interested in feeling good about slavery. Yeah. So that project, it lives on. I'm still trying to build it other places. But the experience of that just really, really taught me how hard it is to, when public monuments get confused as public art, people start to think that everybody has some say in how they're made, right? And they don't. They really, really don't. I think that artists have a vision. Maybe you could trust an artist to come up with a form that would say what you want, what needs to be said. Instead of relying on a committee of citizens, like you don't go to a committee of citizens to fix your sink when you have a leak. You rely on the plumber, right? Because the plumber knows what he's doing. How come you don't trust an artist to know what they're doing, right?
Yeah, and particularly to go through all the hoops that you went through. I mean, as anybody can imagine, to try to put together a project like this, and my memory is it was hundreds of thousands of dollars to put this together.
You know, my budget for the whole thing was $300,000. Yeah, which you know is not very expensive for a permanent public artwork. Sure. The King Memorial that they're doing in Boston is at least 10 times that. Yeah,
but still,
so I mean,
it's a substantial investment, right. and it's in a very public place. But just to go to the point where you had gone through all of those steps, and then something happened where it got pulled back.
Right.
And you know, and again, maybe it does show how much work. I guess this is very obvious, but how much work we all have to do in order to be able to put something out there that is that true and is that fair and is that just. And
Right.
maybe it didn't happen, and who knows whether Boston is right or wrong for it. You and I both know there's a history of racism in Boston, even though, you know, I don't have any opinion or any knowledge about that, having vis-a-vis the particular installation.
Right.
But it's hard to know why it didn't work.
I think that there's two parts to why it didn't work. One was that it wasn't nice, yeah, and the city was behind it.
Yeah.
Like I went to all those people, and I, you know, me, the artist, sitting in a room with people in suits, making the point that this is what needed to be built. That's what got everyone on board. It wasn't anyone else. It was me working and talking to people, right? And then, you know, all the work you have to do just to get a public hearing. Like just to get a public hearing is a huge amount of work. And to have laid the groundwork for all that, and then someone comes along because they weren't included, or people told me that I wasn't a member of the community. So and then like the notion that somehow slavery happened to Black people. Like, so Black people should have a say in how it's memorialized. I was like, well, you know, white people did it. So this isn't a monument for Black people. This is a monument about enslavement, which to my mind is not really something that I had anything to do with. I'm the victim of it. I wasn't the perpetrator of it, right? So when you think about it that way, Hunter, I just think it's really hard. And I think that's one of the reasons why there are so few monuments to queer people. There's so few monuments to the people we lost during the AIDS epidemic. There's so few monuments to the lesbians we lost because of breast cancer. You know, 1 in 4 lesbians will die of breast cancer. It's 1 in women. It's 1 in 4 lesbians. You know, so there's no research. You know, and so like, and there's no monument to the women who went into nursing to take care of gay men who had AIDS. Like those things need to be memorialized, and they haven't been. And part of it is because, you know, a lot of people died with that memory, you know, but the other part of it is that there's no, like, who wants to see a monument to queers? Nobody wants that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and thank you for sharing that. It's an amazing story, and for those of you who are interested in seeing more, if you just Google Steve and Faneuil Hall, you'll see renderings and lots of stuff. And I have a very strong feeling that this is not over yet, and it's something that can be in a city and in a public place, and maybe someday it will be in the city of Boston, or it will be somewhere else. But so sorry for my little fumble there, but Emery, I did email you that slideshow, and hopefully, and if you can share that about, Steve just raised the question about queer and AIDS memorials, and if you can share that with everybody right now.
All right, Emery.
Thank you, Emery. So I just looked the other day, and yeah, play from start's great. So I just pulled sort of randomly some monuments to AIDS and the queer community in the United States today. And so I just want people, Steve, you and I can look at these. You're looking at these for the first time. I'm sure you know some of these, but this, of course, is on Castro and Market, the corner of Castro and Market's Harvey Milk Plaza, which has been dedicated to the city supervisor in San Francisco, who was there in his elected position, I believe, for only a year before he was murdered. And he was certainly known as the mayor of Castro Street for many years. Emery, can we go to the next slide? Pink Triangle Park in San Francisco. I've not seen this memorial. Have you seen it, Steve?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. What's the sense when you get there?
You know, it's the great thing about it is that it is so easily misunderstood, and it forces you to investigate it. And it really is this sort of it's it's a small graveyard essentially.
Yeah.
And it's dedicated to people who have been murdered for being queer. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, it's just a tiny moment. It's like a tiny park. And it's spectacular.
It did remind me, when I was looking at the images, it reminded me of the Holocaust Museum in Berlin, with all of those sort of bunkers there lined up, and how it's so influenced by the shadow and the light and the environment around it. So I had that same feeling. Okay, can we go on to the next one? Okay, the MATTACHINE steps in San Francisco. Of course, the MATTACHINE Society, as many of us on this call know, were very influential in sort of the early days of the current gay liberation movement in the 1950s. And so these steps you can see have been marked as a historic monument there in San Francisco. Next. Oh, Legacy Walk in Chicago. Now, certainly I've seen these. This is on Halsted, I guess, or is it Halsted? Yeah. And of course, this is a wonderful tribute to individuals in Chicago, or LGBTQ community in Chicago. I've never been particularly impressed by the aesthetic quality of it, but when I've been there, I've always been happy to see at least something was there in the gay neighborhood. AIDS Memorial in Indianapolis. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
It's completely denuded of any sort of, that could be anything. You know, it could be the top of a wedding cake. It could be anything. And it's supposed to be like reflective of the ribbon, you know, that sort of shape. But yeah, we deserve better than that.
So the Transgender Memorial Garden in St. Louis. Again, this is one I've not seen personally. I don't know a lot about it, but I was sort of happy to see it here.
Yeah.
So here's the George Segal sculpture that we were speaking about. And just to put it into some kind of context, this is in Sheridan Square in New York City, and it is in the little park, which is now, I believe, a national monument. And it is directly in front of the Stonewall Inn.
It's so amazing. Yeah.
And I think to your point about that earlier, Steve, is the idea that his attempt was really to just putting or depicting individuals who might have been there at any particular time. That this was not about anybody particularly fancy, but it was simply about people who were just pedestrian in the way that they were there.
Right. It's their importance comes from their ordinariness.
Right.
That's what it is. Yeah.
Yes. Frank Kameny House in Washington, and of course Frank Kameny was one of the activists from the 1950s, and so his house has been turned into a memorial as well. And of course, you know, the idea of using historic homes, certainly in the American South with regard to the Civil War, that is definitely a technique which has been used in the past, because it's a way of trying to bring life to the individual. And so we've all toured historic homes. They are important to see, to understand what the creators of the monument want us to get out of it by seeing there, and what's actually being documented and moved further.
Okay.
The Marsha P. Johnson Memorial Fountain here or in New York. This is a relatively new monument. And of course, many people know of Marsha's role with regard to trans rights and gay rights after the Stonewall uprising. And so it's, again, to my eye, it feels somewhat predictable. And I don't know, I don't have a good sense of connecting the individual and the rights with the spot that's here, but that just may be that I haven't studied it enough.
Well, it's also the impulse to like have public spaces named after queer people, right? Yeah. So it's like, it's the important thing is that a public space is named after a trans woman, you know, and that so the, I agree with you. I think that the sort of, the notion of having your name on a park is somewhat anodyne. I really do agree with you in that regard.
Yeah.
And I think that this is one way to honor Marsha Johnson, by introducing her to people in their everyday life. Like, kids are going to go play in a fountain named after a trans woman. Like, that's progress in some ways.
Yes. And yes, a trans woman of color as well too, which I think is sort of a great thing. Okay. The Penny Campbell. So this is a national mark. So this is another way of doing it, which is simply just to put the marker there, and simply to identify an individual. And of course, you know, what's interesting about this is that here we are in Nashville now, and that Nashville has decided that they're going to honor a female LGBTQ rights advocate who was advocating for mental health and housing issues. Now, what would be interesting would be to understand what fight did it actually take to get this marker there.
Right.
It very simple or difficult.
And to get it in the same form and the same language as everybody else is honored. So like that's the thing about these kinds of gestures, is that they start to make Penny Campbell the equal of any other person who's honored by the Nashville Historical Society. And that kind of thing is desperately important.
So for those of you who haven't seen it, this is the AIDS Memorial in Greenwich Village. The building behind it, the white building, is what was known as the new addition to St. Vincent's Hospital. And then what you can't see immediately to the right is the original part of St. Vincent's Hospital, and which is now very high-end condos now. And St. Vincent's, the building directly, both the building directly behind this memorial and the former hospital, were really ground zero for the AIDS epidemic in 1981, 82, 83. It is where every gay man either went to find out what that spot on his arm was about or went to die. They had the best doctors, they had everything. And so this memorial came about, I would say the planning probably started about 10 years ago. Again, I have to say my relationship to it, I'm not particularly moved by it, but what's been your impression of it?
Well, you know, I think that I get the sense that they had to do something. That's kind of how I feel about it. And I like you, I remember the 80s. I remember that moment. I was alive in that moment, you know? And so it's also not about me as a person. It's about the people who don't know what happened, right? That's who this is for. And so there's a certain sort of invitation, and you know, the triangles and all that sort of stuff that sort of reads as the quotidian language when we're trying to honor queer people. Designers, for some reason, always go back to the triangle and its relationship to a symbol of oppression turned into power. But, you know, there's something to be said for a place to mourn, Hunter, you know, a place to weep, right? And that's what the best kinds of memorials to loss give us. They give us a place to weep, you know? Maya Lin in Washington, D.C. and in Birmingham, Alabama, at the Civil Rights Memorial, she gives you a place to weep for the loss. She puts the loss in front of you, right? Daniel Libeskind at the Felix Nussbaum House gives you a place to weep, you know? And so that kind of thing, like a park to honor, to celebrate, to gather, to remember, all that sort of stuff is important. But I think that when we talk about contemporary memorial architecture and we talk about the architecture of loss, that is something very specific that is lacking here, right? Because I think that our, like I said, as Americans, we have a very hard time having anything but unsunny thoughts. It's very hard for us, right? So where's the monument to all the queers who got kicked out of their homes when they got sick?
Yeah.
Where's the monument to the queers whose families looted their apartments while their partners were at the memorial service?
Yes.
Right?
No,
So
it's,
that's what it was.
yes, no, it's
Right.
true. I think we have one more slide here, and this is the AIDS Memorial in Provincetown, Massachusetts. I think Lauren Ewing was the sculptor on this.
Yeah.
And this has had mixed reactions as well too. Some people have really liked it, and some people have also felt it didn't relate to what happened in Provincetown at the time. This is sitting on the grounds of the Provincetown Town Hall. And again, as you said, many of these monuments are done by committee, and this was put together by the Provincetown Arts Committee probably about 5 or 7 years ago. Okay, Emery, if you don't mind, can we take down the slideshow? And we're almost out of time here, but just a couple things. Our friend Justin has pointed out that the slide said that the MATTACHINE steps were in San Francisco, and he says that they're in Los Angeles. That's absolutely correct, so apologize for that. And Charles Kaminsky, thank you. Nice to see you as always. And he points out about the Montgomery, Alabama memorial, and you can see the website for that there, and people can go check that out. And then also he mentions that in San Diego, there's a house that had an apartment of 2 men who were part of the planning committee of what is now known as the center. And he has shared a YouTube link on that. So I think that people pay attention to that. Thank you for that. And so I saw some other things. Megan Cronin said that said your piece was wonderful, which I agree with that. And yes, Megan, it's nice to see you. Haven't seen you in a long time.
In a long time, buddy.
And shout out to the South End. We have a lot of agreement with the idea that a lot of these public monuments are horribly made. And we also have a suggestion that people want to send you money for making your monument someplace in some city.
That's very sweet. That's very sweet.
And so that's great. So okay, so yes, where can we donate to Professor Locke's projects? So I'm sure that if you go to, is it stevelocke.com?
You know, it's a time of COVID, right? I have a job. I have an art practice. I am fine. I am fine. Good. Give the money, find somebody who lost their job and give the money to them. Excellent. Find someone who's an artist, a dancer, a musician, whose gigs are canceled. Like, find those people and give the money to them. I'm fine. I have a job. I'm good. I'm working. I'm teaching. I'm fine. But thank you.
That's very sweet. So our time has unfortunately come to an end. We've actually gone 3 minutes over. And so, but we tried to pack a lot into this hour. So Steve, I cannot thank you enough. You've been very generous with your time and with your thoughts. Anything you want to leave us with here at the end?
I am just so grateful to you and to all the work that you've done throughout the years, Hunter. I'm telling you, like when the book is written, like I said, people don't know. People don't know how much you've done and how many institutions you've saved and how many careers you've altered. And I'm just so grateful for your friendship over the years. Like I said, I don't like to talk to very many people about my work, but I will talk to you anytime you want. I'm so grateful to you.
You are so incredibly sweet. It's always it's always great to see you. I'm sorry I can't literally give you a hug right now, but thank you so much for being here.
You're one of the few reasons I would go to Florida, okay?
You're welcome anytime. Hey, listen, this would be your guest bedroom. So the sofa pulls out, you can stay here, air conditioning is great. So.
And I can sleep under the poster, that's perfect.
So thank you everybody for being here. Emery Grant, show yourself here, let everybody see you.
Emery,
all the great work that you do. And so again, if you have any ideas of people to join this series, please send them our way. Go to our website, stonewall-museum.org. And we're booked almost all the way through December. It's been great that people have wanted to join the series. And we've had a lot of really interesting conversations. Just to remind everybody, this conversation is being recorded and you can find it on our website. And so you can do that. And so be nice to everybody, stay safe. And the only one thing I have to say is that if you know anybody in a swing state, please make sure they're registered to vote.
Please.
And November 3rd, I'm now going to get on this thing about voting. I'm not going to suggest who people might vote for, but all I'll suggest is that it's really important that everybody get out there and vote. Bye-bye.
Bye.